Hello, this is a development diary of sorts. I had a few days off last week and I decided to try Unity, the game engine, by embarking on a new personal project. It's very much inspired by Game Boy Zelda games, and it's a type of, I guess it's a top-down, turn-based dungeon puzzler. I say turn-based, but the turns are very small, sort of like you would get in maybe a roguelike or in a rhythm game like Crypt of the Necrodancer. You move up, down, left, or right, and then everything that can also move moves, and then it's your turn again. The artwork is incidental, really. I'm no artist, but I needed the bare minimum I could get away with drawing to get everything working. The more I look at these Game Boy inspired shades, the more I think the greens are a little bit too yellow. Um, but it's just something that I'm playing with. Um, and it's easy enough to swap out if I want to. I ended up leaning more towards puzzle-oriented design than action-oriented design, kind of by accident, really. Puzzles are easier to draw out on paper, and in the run-up to starting this new project, I designed a bunch of rooms and scenarios on graph paper because I guess I had ideas and I had to get them down. So yeah, just kind of naturally went down the path towards puzzles. I wanted to work with only a small number of objects, but I wanted to let those objects have a large number of interactions with each other so that I can do a lot with only a little. The player character can push mushrooms around on top of stone tiles. Arrows shoot out of walls or out of arrow blocks, and the player can't get past them. But mushrooms can block projectiles, therefore allowing the player to get past. While pushing or pulling, the player can't move into the path of a line of arrows, so the player can't push a block right through a line of arrows and lose access to it, because this could render a puzzle unsolvable. If the player walks past a witch, the witch turns and throws a fireball towards the player. Fireballs burn mushrooms, stopping arrows from being blocked, usually so they can hit switches or allowing the player to walk down previously blocked paths. Arrow blocks can be pushed and pulled just like mushrooms, and they emit arrows, similarly to the holes in the walls. So the player can direct streams of arrows towards switches by pushing arrow blocks around. Switches can be on the walls, where they have to be hit by projectiles, or they can be on the floor, where they have to be pressed by the player or something pushable. Projectiles can travel over holes in the ground, but the player can't. If a projectile, that is an arrow or a fireball, moves into the player's space, it knocks the player back to the square that they were last on. Rotators turn projectiles 90 degrees counterclockwise. They can be used to hit trickier switches or to allow the player to get past lines of arrows. To the player, rotators are solid, so they can also block the player's path, in which case the player may need to activate or deactivate a switch to turn off a rotator to get through. For some puzzles, projectiles have to be directed from one room into an adjacent room. there may be a witch in one room throwing fireballs, and in another room, which is just next to that room, there is a mushroom that needs to be burned. Or maybe there's a projectile in one room, and in an adjacent room there's a switch that needs to be hit. If a projectile approaches a witch, she will protect herself by casting 3 rotators, 1 in front of her and 2 to the sides. Knowing this, the player can target a witch with a projectile in order to knowingly rotate the projectile. The player can also take out a witch by turning the witch and then directing a projectile at the witch's back, because the witch can only protect in front of her and to the sides. I've started playing with the idea of a mini-boss fight, but it's difficult to ramp up the tension because of the turn-based gameplay. Even with multiple projectiles to try and evade, you can still stop and work out what the next best move is, if there is one, and act accordingly. So it always, I don't know, it still feels fairly low stakes. There is a mini-boss witch who moves around, and you've got to use rotators to hit her with her own fireballs, and it works, but I need to give it some more thought. In the final phase, another character appears, and this character shoots arrows at the player, and the arrows have to be lined up so that they hit the witch instead. I'm not sure if I'll stick with all of the different phases, but it's fun to play around with to try and work out what works and what doesn't. And then I guess there are a couple of little points of note. Every now and again there are some seams that can be seen on the tile map between tiles. I've seen a few solutions to this on the internet, but nothing has quite done the trick just yet. Anti-aliasing is turned off, so it's not that. And I've set just the tiniest overlap between adjacent tiles, because I've seen that suggested, but that hasn't fixed it either. So I'll probably end up looking for a plugin or something on the Unity store. I need to build a better timing controller. The player has to wait for everything else to move before they can move again, which takes a fixed amount of time. But because that takes a fixed amount of time, it can end up making input feel sluggish if the player wants to move quickly, but they have to wait for everything else to catch up. I think the next big thing that one's putting together is maybe some sort of dialogue system. If I'm going to keep the mini-boss, it would be fun to have some interaction between the player character and the mini-boss, and it might be worth using the dialogue system as well to build hints into the game by giving the player maybe a companion that they can talk to get clues about the room that they're in. I think a lot of the sprite patterns are a bit too busy for 4 colors, so I think either the game needs more color or it needs simpler patterns, so that more dangerous objects like the arrows and the fireballs don't get lost in the overall design. I'm quite happy with what I've done with it at the moment, and yeah, I'm just going to keep playing with it.